Welcome to Integrated. This is the podcast where we seek to bridge the gap between the intellect and the will so that we can grow as disciples of Christ, surrendering all that we are and all that we have to the truth. Hey guys, welcome back to Integrated. My name is Angela Erickson, and I'm really excited that you're joining me today. Now, for those of you who maybe are just tuning in and you haven't had a chance to read the description, today I'm going to be talking about how pornography corrupts the soul with Jordan Burke. But before we get started, I, of course, want to give a little bit of a parental discretion advice. If you have little ears today, maybe just be prudent and put those earbuds, a Bible, and a rosary. Falling deeply in love with the church and her teachings, he dove headfirst into the writings of the saints and all aspects of spiritual theology, and he hasn't stopped learning since. Combining his love of the truth, history, and tradition with practical application, Jordan turned his life motto, do the harder thing, into a program of acquiring virtue and overcoming habitual sin for all those who seek to become who God called them to be. So when he's not writing, researching, farming, and praying, he is, most importantly, a loving father of a beautiful little girl and a zealous defender of souls. Today, we're bringing Jordan on to talk about pornography. So thank you so much for coming on the show today, Jordan. It's great to have you here.
It's awesome to be here. I don't know who wrote that bio, but it's way better than the other one I have. So we'll keep it. That's good.
Is that a good one? I was like reading it thinking, this seems pretty up to date. I mean,
That's great. Yeah.
That's great. Maybe your dad went in there on the back end and just...
I'll have to thank him, whoever did it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on to talk about such a sensitive issue. I've been so impressed when I've seen parts and clips of you talking about your story. You are really like an open book with this issue, and I can tell that there's a very sincere desire to help people break free of these vices. So would you mind sharing a little bit about why you have expressed such share your story so openly, because I imagine there's a lot of shame around an issue like pornography.
Yeah, no, there absolutely can be, and there generally is. I think in my story, I was led down a path where spoiler, I struggled with it for a long time. It destroyed my marriage. It caused all sorts of issues. But in the course of overcoming that by the grace of God and coming to who God has called me to be, it became evident that, testimony is really powerful. And the more vulnerable I am, the less, number one, the enemy has a hold over me in regards to shame. I don't have any shame about any of that anymore. And it's really impactful for people who hear it, because they could recognize, oh, I'm not alone. Oh, this is a struggle. Oh, it is possible to overcome. So if I can be any sort of beacon of hope, even if I'm just the guy who's walking ahead of you who says, hey, there's some ice there, don't slip, I slipped, then, all the better.
And this sort of makes me think about how at our final judgment, our sins will be made known to the world. And one of the things that they say about the elect is that they will not have shame about the sins that they've committed, even though all will be known. And I think this is our way of sort of, I don't know, manifesting that in this life so that we aren't worried about it in the future. I mean, we're taking ownership of it in such a strong way that, of course, we acknowledge, like, look at me, I'm such a sinner, and God loves me and saves me anyway, despite my infidelity, literal and figuratively. So let's start at the beginning then. You said you kind of made mention that this did impact your marriage. Would you mind talking about, like, I don't know what happened, whatever you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah. So I struggled with pornography for many, many years. I was at the time I was supposed to be homeschooled, but my folks had split, and my mom was struggling with a lot of different things, alcoholism, which I believe she's doing much better now. But she had kicked my dad out of the house, and then, as I said, I was supposed to be homeschooled, but that wasn't happening, so I wasn't going to any school. And I was in the basement with unlimited internet access. And as it is in the modern age and how the enemy works, you don't even have to look for it. I don't recall ever looking for it. I probably just stumbled across it, and that was it. The hooks were in. So from a very, very young age into my adult years, it was a habitual problem. Now, in my adult years, it became sort of a coping mechanism, which it is for a lot of people, where they have some sort of emotion that they don't know how to deal with, or maybe they don't even necessarily understand. And so they act out in order to kind of mitigate whatever they're feeling or experiencing. And that was very much true, at least in my case, and for many of the guys that I've counseled in the past. And when it came to my marriage, obviously, as you mentioned, the infidelity, because pornography is infidelity, that played a role. The way that it had impacted how I viewed women, the way it impacted how I viewed myself,
Mhm.
intimacy, all these other different things were just degraded to the point where they were toxic in a lot of different ways. And that just, it's, sin, this is so cliche, but it's true. It's like you throw a pebble in a pond and there's a ripple effect. That's sin. And for something like this, which is mortal and it is grave, and the ripple effects of these are so much more impactful than I think people realize. So yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but
Yeah, no, I think that it's really interesting too, because I don't think most people understand. Sorry, this is Veronica. she's she's ready to say hi. She might mean mug you a little bit.
that's okay.
Um,
I get that a lot.
so for most kids, I mean, there's a high percentage of children, and we're not even talking
Right.
teens, but children who are being exposed to pornography for the first time. I mean, I remember the first time I encountered it, it was back when VHSs were like, we're still using
Right.
VHS. And I happened to come upon my biological dad's collection.
Mm,
And I just remember being like, what is this? I couldn't understand what I was seeing. And I still remember my oldest sister sort of like kind of shooing us away, and you need to get out of here, stay
yeah.
out of this room. And I remember that left an imprint, because I could tell it shaped the way that my biological dad treated women. I mean, he would speak sexually towards my sisters and I, or just
Mm,
weird grooming type things, making comments about our bodies from a very young age. And at the time, I remember thinking, I don't understand why, like, this makes me feel yucky.
yeah.
This makes me feel icky, but I didn't have the lexicon to explain why until I was much older. And so um, I think there's a lot to be said about it shaping the way that men view women and vice versa. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. But um, do you think that it's sort of understated by most people or ignored how this really changes perception and how we view ourselves in relation to the other sex?
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt, and we're seeing a lot of it in. So I'm traditional, so to speak. I hate labels,
Me,
but I fall
I
into
get
the
it.
traditional camp. Yeah,
Yeah, me too.
but we even see this in a huge way in the traditional camp, where there is even an overcorrection. So this is just a small example of modesty. I'm all for modesty, but I've often joked, it's like you talk to guys or you're in a men's group or men's chat, and it's like, oh, everyone should be wearing burlap sacks. And it's like,
Yeah.
listen, dude, this is
Yeah.
this. I mentioned it on a story the other day. I was like, you're borderline Manichaeism, or and
Well,
into
there's
that.
an extreme fundamentalism that is
Yeah.
infecting traditionalism, and I've talked about that actually for anyone who maybe is interested. I did a Apostles' Creed, is what I call them when I just vent about something that's on my mind. And I had an Apostles' Creed regarding Trad Inc. because I'm like
Mm,
you. I consider myself a traditionalist. I love the traditional liturgy. I love going to the traditional Latin Mass, but there is a fundamentalism that has sort of creeped into the church, especially amongst traditionalists, is an overreaction. I totally agree.
yeah.
And you're right. I think even with the modesty discussion, which I think is very prevalent amongst Catholic women, um, it's like, yeah, being covered head to toe, but also God made us to need vitamin D, which we absorb through the skin, and it helps our metabolism. Like there are things and mechanisms in place in our bodies that we have to consider when we're
Right.
making these broad comments. But anyway, that's a totally different issue. I'm
It's-
sorry. That's just how my brain works. But anyway, back to pornography. um, when did you realize that this was a problem for you?
That's a great question. I knew, so I had converted to Catholicism, and actually just found my confirmation document the other day. It was in
Wow.
2009. So I was still fairly young at that time. I believe it was. I'm terrible with chronological time. I'm impaired, I swear. But it was like
Okay.
high school or pre-high school or something like that. But as I've said, whenever I give my testimony, it was very intellectual.
Hmm.
So with that, I knew I had an intellectual understanding of, okay, some things are not permitted, but I didn't know enough about it, and I didn't care enough about the faith to really dive into why. So it was kind of like in the background, like my conscience in the background, or my
Mm.
guardian angel probably was like, hey dude, you need to stop. But it didn't click with me. So
Mhm.
we carried on for years. I think it was more once I was actually a cop, because it's so, any military or cop guy will tell you, or gal, I guess, It's really prevalent in that world. It's just for whatever reason super prevalent, and so it was accepted, but I was started feeling worse at that time. Like something isn't right, something isn't clicking. I think it was probably around then when I started realizing, okay, this is an issue, but it still didn't like really hit until, everything blew up in my marriage. And at that time I knew it was wrong because I was trying to hide it and things of that nature. Um, yeah. So it was probably around that time, early 20s is when it started clicking, but it still didn't like really impact until a few years later.
So maybe then let's talk about what are the impacts of consuming pornography on the soul? What are all of the sins incurred with that? And are there things that maybe aren't so obvious? Like it's obvious lust is a problem, and Jesus
Right.
says that any man who looks upon a woman with lust in his heart has already committed adultery. But what are some things that maybe are less obvious to people who are just kind of superficial, like you were, just like whatever? I kind of know maybe that this is wrong, but it's not a big deal yet, or I'm not ready to change yet.
Well, to be totally clear, as you know, and I'm sure most of your audience knows, pornography, masturbation, anything along those lines is a grave mortal sin, period, full stop, period. There's some folks out there who try to float this gray line of like addiction and lessening culpability, which I take a huge issue with. I don't think it's appropriate at all. I don't think it's helpful, especially because I can't even tell you how many men I've counseled. And that sort of discussion is not helpful. It ends up hindering their progress in a lot of ways. But in terms of things that people don't know, I mean, there was a study. It's gaining traction now, which is phenomenal. But there was a study, a couple years ago, that showed that frequent use or habitual use of pornography started lessening gray matter in the brain. So we joke and say sin makes you stupid, but in this case, it literally does make you
Wow.
stupid, right?
Yeah.
Not to mention, there's physiological aspects that will cause problems. There are guys who who are in a relationship, and whether or not they're doing this correctly or incorrectly, right? I'll trying to phrase things very carefully.
Yeah. Yep.
There's physiological effects, so they can't. Let's just say, in best case scenario, they get married and they have
Maybe are
issues.
impotent.
That's perfect way to say it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then, as you mentioned, viewing the other person, this was a huge issue, even for me, for a long time, where you essentially what you're doing is you're training your body to respond to different inputs. So you see a woman walking down the street and all these sorts of things are going on in your head, it becomes sinful. And it's because that's what you've trained your body to do. You've just trained it to do that.
That's
So,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, classical conditioning. That makes a
Right.
ton of sense. Yep. So apart from the physiological, um, would you say that there are any spirits in particular that are associated with this addiction
Oh, for
specifically?
sure. Yeah. Yeah. So there's been plenty of exorcists who've spoken. So I should back up and say I started talking about this originally on my Instagram profile and counseled a whole bunch of guys and worked with a whole bunch of experts. In the past year and a half or so, I've transitioned just kind of how God, I mean, how God calls you in different directions. Now I'm primarily in the spiritual warfare, but it overlaps a lot. So as I was saying, we work with a lot of exorcists, and there have been plenty that have been out there who are outspoken on the fact that there are pornographers who are actually cursing the videos. So there is a possibility. It sounds crazy to people, but I got all the textbooks behind me. I can tell you.
I believe it. Yeah.
Yeah, you can get possessed. I mean, you can outright be possessed. Not to mention just the general oppression that could come from it. Not to mention the impact of the mortal sin on your soul. So we have varying levels of impact. All of them are bad.
Yeah, I think that's one thing it's so easy because those carnal pleasures, it's so easy to be addicted to them, and then it just wreaks havoc on your
Right.
life and your relationships in every single way. And then I feel like when you are feeling discouraged, which is of course something the enemy wants us to feel, he wants us to be isolated from one another and disconnected. Um, then like the last couple of years has just been this perfect breeding ground for more of this, for more pornography consumption. And it's really bizarre. I don't know if you heard this, but in my last interview, Nicholas Cavazos was saying something like there are more women with OnlyFans accounts now than there are teachers in the US.
I didn't know
And
that, but I'm
I
not surprised.
blew my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what do you think we need to start doing, or how do we move forward from this? Because men are struggling with this, women are, um, under the guise of empowerment, are putting themselves out there in this way, and that is another thing that I find so interesting. So, where do we go from here when we're looking at all these factors sort of coalescing together? Um, or where do people start to find help, even?
Yeah, it's a phenomenal question because, as you mentioned, there's so many different factors. I think one of the big ones for me is recognizing who God has called you to be and living out that, whether it's vocation or mission. Vocation is thrown around in a lot of different ways, but strictly speaking, vocation or mission, God's called you to something. That's a fact. He knitted, well, I can't remember the verse off the top of my head, but it's something about knitted you in the womb, right? That takes
Yeah.
care and attention. That's purposeful. He has a plan for each and every one of us. So when we start living that out, there's profound healing and growth that can occur in that aspect of it. The other thing is, we just need to start rejecting the world. It's like we recognize that the world is in control of the evil one. It's in scripture. And as you mentioned, I mean, so much of this is being pushed by culture, quote unquote. It's becoming more normal, and everything that from TV to movies, all these other different things it's thrown about, advertising. I mean, there's even studies. I saw a study, I believe it was out of a university in Denver, that showed how Instagram was purposefully pushing pornographic content to the phones of men in their explore feed. And I can tell you, there's been times where I've been on there and I'm like, where? Because people
Where
can
does this
make
even come from?
right.
Yeah.
People can make excuses. It's like, oh, it's what you watch and it's what you click. It's like, dude, my phone is locked down and this
Yeah.
stuff still pops up. So I don't know what to tell you.
Well, and I had that experience just going on TikTok. I was on
Yeah.
TikTok for like 2 days, 2 whole days, and I couldn't believe how much garbage was on there. And it's so easy to just scroll through and you just
Yeah.
keep getting more garbage and more young girls who are being super inappropriate. It's like,
Right.
where are these parents? What is going on here where we're just letting people, these little young people with very underdeveloped brains, just have free reign access on this stuff. So how do you think this is changing intimacy? Like, is it do you think it's possible? Because I feel like I hear this a lot. Do you think it's possible for somebody to consume pornography and have it not impact his relationships
Oh,
or how he views his spouse or his
not,
girlfriend?
yeah, no, not even remotely possible. It's just not. I mean, we're not even speaking of the spiritual side, because the spiritual side is clear. There's no arguments there. The church is
Right.
very clear on this. But on the practical side, the scientific side, absolutely not. It's going to impact you in ways that you have no clue. I mean, we have multiple different accounts and reports of women who are being forced to engage in things that they would never want to engage in because their significant other saw it in pornography. Well, how do you think that impacts the relationship, right? It's
Hmm.
going to have a negative effect. Trust goes down. All these other different things are impacted. Yeah, no, it's I've heard that excuse as well, and I just kind of laugh. It's like, I don't know what world you're living in, but that's not reality.
Exactly. I have to agree. But I did want to ask this question because one of our viewers here asks that, or says that she's curious what people do if their imagination is the problem. Like, what do you do with somebody who even stops consuming pornography, but their imagination, especially for men, because you guys
Mhm.
are so visual,
Right.
that stuff just gets like burned into your brain. What do you do when you're trying to break away from that and your imagination continues to be an issue?
It's a phenomenal question, and myself included, dealt with it. Every guy I've talked to has dealt with it. One of the things that I always recommend, I think I got this from Father Ripperger actually, was to pray to your guardian angel and Our Lady of Sorrows to help cleanse your memory.
Mm.
That's very, very powerful. Another thing that's important to do, that I was just speaking with another priest not too long ago, and he mentioned this, and as soon as he said it, I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've never thought of this before. It's so brilliant. But to break soul ties, and that's a whole topic.
Can we talk about it, please?
Sure.
I've been
Yeah.
dying to interview somebody on this topic because, oh, I'm so glad that you brought this up. I can't even tell you how long I've had this on my list of things to talk about,
Sure.
and I just haven't found anybody that I felt had enough knowledge on it because it's not something we talk about enough.
Right.
Oh, I'm so excited. I don't even know where to start.
Well, so I'll tell you the little bit that I do know. So
Okay.
my knowledge of this comes kind of in a reverse order. So I found out about it through the exorcists up at St. Michael's Center in DC. They have a phenomenal prayer on their app to break soul ties. So to close out the previous conversation, praying to break soul ties for everyone that you have viewed within the pornography, even if you can't think of who they are, even if you don't know their names, it doesn't matter. Just pray the prayer to break it. It's very,
So what
very
you're
important.
saying is you are creating a relationship between
Yes.
you, and that's something that people overlook too. And I'm glad that
Yep.
you brought that up, because it's not just that you're consuming pornography, you are creating a tie, a relationship with this person, even if they're not physically with you.
Right. Right. Even if you're, yes, exactly. And for, if people want to go in depth on this, because again, my knowledge is cursory, it's just enough to know that it's real.
Hmm.
Women of Grace, who are phenomenal, I can't speak highly of them enough. They have a great article on soul ties. You can go to their website, search it, and they list all the biblical or all the scripture verses that talk about. St. Paul mentions it at some point, and kind of gives a brief breakdown. But it's essentially exactly as you described. You are creating some sort of tie with that person. And you can have it. This is interesting for people too, is that it's not just sexual relationships. That's primarily when it comes in, is sexual relationships.
Hmm.
So any illicit relationships you've had in the past at any level, you can have a soul tie there, including pornography, which is not even, as you mentioned, they're not physically there, but even with trauma, right? You can
Hmm.
have a soul tie related there with trauma. So seeking healing for those things is deeply important. So to the question of memory, those sorts of things, whether it's asking for Our Lady of Sorrows and your guardian angel to cleanse your memory, or breaking soul ties, or both, that's really helpful. And then I found as well is the less crap that I put in my head, to be quite frank. I've limited so much of the music I listen to. I haven't owned a TV in, gosh, over a decade, if not longer. Even YouTube is what I watch most, right? So but I
Hmm.
limit that even. But music and what you take in has a huge effect, and people don't realize it, on triggering these different types of emotions and memories and things like that. The more good you put in, the more bad you push out. And I have no, we've talked about science and data. I have nothing to back that up other than my own experience and talking to other people, but I'm telling you it works.
But I think it's pretty common sense. You become what you consume. That's why we consume our
Right.
Lord, right? To be
Right.
more like him.
Yes.
And so you put a lot of garbage in, you're going to get a lot of garbage out. It's
Yep.
fast food. It's built into our bodies in that sort of teleological understanding of who we are. If people here are interested in teleology, I know some people aren't, but I am. I think we can learn a lot about God and our relationship with God by
Yeah.
looking at how He made us. So I think it makes perfect sense. And so even if you don't have the data, I agree with you.
Perfect.
Um, so maybe practical steps moving forward. And how have you, what steps have you taken apart from, praying to break soul ties and these kinds of things? What were some of the practical ways that you broke free of this vice? Because that's another thing I think, fasting, things like that, we have to take control of, all of our desires in a sense, or sort of mortify ourselves if we want to break free from vice. So, what are some of the things that you've done that you think maybe would be helpful to other men and women
Yeah.
who are struggling?
Yeah, so in my story, I attacked this thing pretty hard because I hit rock bottom even harder, to the point where I went to a clinic in Tennessee for a little while, and I spent some time with some of, in my opinion, at least, some of the greatest CSATs, which is certified sex addiction therapy specialist or something like that. Which I was never clinically addicted, to be clear, but spent time with them to understand this process, and they were helping me out and helping me with my own healing and things of that nature. Coming out of that, I kind of discovered that, yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff out there in the secular world, the understanding, the science, the data, all those other different things, but they're lacking something significant, which is the spiritual side. So
Hmm.
combining those two things, I created, which is out on my website, it's totally free. It's called the Immediate Action Plan. And it's basically 5 steps that you can take today in order for you to go and start making positive improvement and steps towards overcoming this vice. And quite frankly, what's interesting is that they work for any vice. If it's overeating, if it's, whatever, for the most part, you have to kind of twist twist some of the things to make them fit in the keyhole. But those 5 steps are essentially, in terms of pornography, blocking and accountability software. That's number one. You have to remove the drug. No one,
Hmm.
it's like going to an AA meeting in a brewery. Like, you're not going to make any progress with what is tempting you right there. you have to remove it. And on top of that, and this is where most people fail, by the way, it's blocking and accountability.
Yeah.
Blocking software is going to do nothing if you don't have anyone holding you accountable. You're just going to go through it. You're going to delete it. It happens all the time. So you have to have somebody that you trust who's going to send you a text message or call you and say, hey, listen, something popped up on your report. Are you doing okay? Like what steps do we need to take? So that's huge. You have to, I still to this day have Covenant eyes on all my devices, because it's like, I want to keep that door closed. And I know that the enemy is going to tempt me at some time. He's going to wait until my guard is low. He's going to bring it back up. And I want to make sure that door is closed.
Before you move forward, when are you most spiritually weak? I mean, is it when you're tired and hungry? Like some of those like really basic things. Yeah, like when are you most susceptible? I think people need to know and have an awareness of when they're most susceptible to attacks from the enemy.
Yeah. So halt is classic: hungry, angry, lonely, tired, and then add bored, especially for men. Especially for men, because we're created to do and be actionable beings. And so when we're not being actionable beings, we're very susceptible to boredom. So I'm telling guys all the time, this is like one of the very rare times I'm like, yeah, okay, maybe you should get on video games to distract yourself. Very rare, very rare. Otherwise, I'm like, delete it. You need to
not video games with like gross women on there. I mean, because there are plenty of that in that world too.
For sure.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
No, you're good.
derail you, but like, what are some of the other things that maybe helped you, or you would recommend? Is that what we were talking about?
Yeah. Well, so the other temptations too is very an emotional states. We have to be very aware of our emotional state. This was a huge thing for me. So I reckon one of the best things that you can do is, if you're feeling tempted, well, first of all, you need to pray for the grace. I feel like I'm bouncing around. I apologize.
It's probably my fault.
Sorry. Good. I'm ADHD anyway, so it kind of works. So you have to pray for the grace to be able to recognize the movements in which you can stop and see what's going on. You have to pray for that grace, because we don't just have it naturally. Your guardian angel is going to be a huge help in this. Like, please just give me a moment of clarity so I can recognize, oh, I'm being tempted right now, or I'm feeling some kind of way. And in that, when you're feeling whatever you're feeling, if you can write down 3 things: what are you feeling? Where are you at? What are you doing? It can be any combination of, I generally say 3 things. It can be any of these 3 things. Are you talking to somebody? Did you see something? Trying to get some sort of idea of what is causing whatever you're experiencing, so that you can react and plan better in the future. Right. So that's that kind of aspect of it. And that actually goes into the next step, which is learning your triggers. You got to learn your triggers. You got to learn what's going on. Like, people would be shocked, and guys constantly, when I asked them, hey, start writing out whenever you fail, the time of day whenever you fail. And what do you see? It's almost the exact same time. Every time. Like, oh, guess what? You've just been given a huge grace, because you know that at 8 p.m. you get tempted. And now what does that mean? You have a plan of attack. What are you going to do? I've had guys lock their phones in their car. I've had them chuck their laptops out the window, like whatever it takes, whatever it takes, because okay, at this time, this is when the temptation comes, and I need to be prepared. Grace sufficient to the day. I need to do what I need to do to overcome that. And the temptations can be anything. But when when I explain it, it's like, you're on a battlefield. We're on a spiritual battlefield anyway. You have a castle or a fort that is around your soul that you need to protect, your heart and your soul and your mind. The enemy is coming. Yes, it sucks when we fall. But all the saints dealt with it. And how did they respond? You got to get back up. Well, what does that mean for us? Okay, the enemy attacked, and he got through this wall. He came at 6 p.m. on a Saturday, and I wasn't paying attention, and I was scrolling through social media or whatever the case may be. And, I just went down the rabbit hole. Okay, well, that wall is weak. So what are we going to do? These are the conversations that I have with these guys. So what are you going to do next? I think I need to keep my phone, downstairs. Okay, how about let's do one better? Because here's the other thing. This is very important. How about we delete social media? How about you delete it? And use Covenant Eyes to put a lock on it so you don't re-download it. Because again, if you know that it's a temptation, the verse that just came to, it's like a dog returning to its vomit.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
It's a temptation. Then why are you keeping it? Well, because most days I'm okay. Okay. And
yep.
Are you willing to take that like, do you understand the risk that you're taking, the gamble that you're taking with your soul? You can die in your sleep, bro. Sister, whoever.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think and that's another reminder why we need to recall daily our death, that memento mori
Yes.
mentality. I've been reading about the Noonday Devil. I've been reading that
Yeah.
book. And I think sloth has a lot to do with this. And sloth uh, really ties in with a lot of other sins like gluttony and things like
Yep.
that. And it just seems to me when you're struggling with um, problems of not being chaste or having a weak spiritual life and gluttony, like all of these these are the seven deadly sins and they all come together when you're not being diligent about these things. So I think having actionable items for people to get started and live out with if they're convicted about something. I think how often do you see men who maybe are intellectually convinced that they have a problem, but they lack the willpower and that true desire where there's still a gap there and they're not ready to fully commit.
Every day. You want to hear a stunning statistic? 100% of the men. And so part of what we do, just to back up what I'm about to say, part of what we do is the Avila Foundation is called My High Calling Program, which is where we help assist young men in the propedeutic year, getting them ready for seminary and discerning seminary.
Mm.
So our program is in multiple seminaries all over the United States, including the Mount, which runs the entire propedeutic year, and working with priests and vocations directors. So we're very ingrained with seminarians, all these young men who are intellectually there. One of the priests who helps head the program said in one of our talks recently, 100% of the men entering seminary have a pornography problem.
Oh, Lord Jesus, have mercy.
100%. So all of these
Mm.
young men who are striving for goodness, this is not a mark. I'm not trying to degrade any of them, of course.
Mhm.
Striving for goodness, striving for virtue, trying to answer a call, intellectually there for the most part, and are still struggling. Right?
Oh, it's a good reminder to pray for our priests and our
Huge.
seminarians. I've been reading about also the apostolate of holy motherhood, and it's
Yeah.
these are a series of visions that I don't know that it has an imprimatur, everything like that, but it's private. You don't have to believe it if you don't want to. But one thing that is discussed at length is praying for purity and
Mm,
protecting our children's purity, because I mean we're kind of robbing children of their innocence, and you're only a child for so long.
right.
And so we we have a duty as parents. It's not just about feeding our kids and clothing them and making sure they go to church on Sunday, but we actually have a duty to do the best that we can to protect their innocence within reason. You can't obviously deal with everything,
Right.
but I think that's providing that foundation is like one of the best things we can do for our children long term, even if we do it imperfectly. But to hear that seminarians are going into this and they're you would think are the ones striving for purity more than the average, that's a lot to take in.
It's rough, and a lot of it too, in my personal belief, and another one of the many things that I have my hands in is helping people determine their vocation and mission and things like that. And my belief is that if you can help start when they're young and start teaching them that they're beautiful and
Mhm.
they're created in a particular way and that they have a mission. Because here's the thing, I mean, we can have all the blocking software, we can swing too far in the other direction and become Luddites and not let our children, experience any of these things. But the
Show
fact
their ankles.
Right, exactly. But the fact of the matter is somebody's going to show it to them no matter what
Mhm.
you do. That's just the unfortunate reality of the world that we live in. So my question was always, okay, well, what do I do then? And the only thing that I can think of is I prepare my daughter on the front side and say, if
Mhm.
you experience this, we need to talk about it. You're not in trouble. You're safe.
Yes.
Let's talk about it, but also giving them the confidence and the ability to speak out even themselves. So if something comes up, they ideally can say, hey, I don't want any part of this. This makes me feel bad. I don't want this. Like if you can
Mhm.
just equip your children to say that, that's huge. That's huge.
There's a really good book that we've used with our kids. I think it's Good Pictures, Bad
Yeah. Yeah.
Pictures.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's good pictures, bad pictures, porn proofing today's young kids. And so we have talked with our children at length, well, at least I have anyway, at length about red flags and
Mhm.
green flags. So what is red flag behavior? Because we had an incident where a teenage boy approached my daughter at a playground, and he had been scrolling on his phone. I don't know. God only knows what he was looking at. But then he approached my daughter and asked her a couple of questions, and it was all very veiled. Now, my daughter is 8 right now, so she was 7 at the time. And he asked her, "Do you like cherries or peaches?" And she said, "Well, I mean, I like cherries." Or how did she say that? Yeah, cherries and peaches. And I thought, what a weird thing to say. And I know that like there are different emojis used,
Right.
that's where my brain went. And she kept saying this, like, "Do you like cherries and peaches?" So she and her brother were joking about it. And she finally told me, a week or so later that he had asked her to show him something inappropriate on her body. And I thought, we can't even go to the playground
Right.
without worrying about teen boys. And his mom was there, and she just walked right away from him. She didn't say anything. She walked away, praise be to God. And I think, I'm glad that she felt safe enough to even do that, because I know my trauma response is to fawn. And so I freeze up and I like try to make people feel better when I'm
Mm,
scared.
mm.
Um and for her, she just walked right away, thanks be to God. But she didn't tell me right away. I think she was so confused and stunned, like,
Right.
what did he just ask me? And so it took her a while to process that, and I realized that how she was processing it was by joking about, "Do you like cherries and peaches?" Because that was the part that she like
Mm.
kind of understood, I think, and her, but not really. She understood it at a superficial level. She didn't understand the meaning behind it. And anyway, I just thought, this is what we're dealing with today.
Right.
I have to prepare my children, like you said, and we all have to do that. It's scary. Like, it's scary to be a parent, and know. And then the other part of the pornography thing is the sex trafficking
Yeah.
involved in that. So how do you talk to men about that, or women? I mean, you're probably not talking to women so much, but like, how do we really highlight the sex trafficking aspect of this? Because I think everyone assumes that these women are all just doing it because they want to.
Right. Yeah. So it is a scary time, but it also is the time of information, which has benefited us greatly in this fight, in the sense that there's two or foundations, I guess, that come to the top of my head immediately. So Exodus Cry, I don't know if you're familiar with them, and then
Yeah,
Fight the New Drug.
I
Now,
love
both
them.
of those are not non-religious, but the work that they're doing is phenomenal, especially Exodus Cry, because I think they're involved with different lawsuits with some of the major
Yeah, with Layla
porn sites.
McElwit, I
Yeah,
think is
she's
her.
amazing.
She's really amazing.
She's incredible. Lifting the veil of all these other different things. So when you look into the data that they provided, and even Fight the New Drug has had interviews with former quote unquote performers, right?
Mhm.
Just on that, every single one of them will tell you coerced, drugs, alcohol. This was not a willing situation.
Mhm.
Exodus Cry has phenomenal data on how many of those videos are actually videos of illegal activity, like a rape that had occurred,
Yeah.
that cannot be removed, right? All these other different things. And so one of the things I tell guys, as I said, so you're telling me that you're willing to take a risk, take a gamble on the fact that the video that you're watching is not rape, because you can't in any way, shape, or form intellectually tell me that you know whether or not that this is consensual. Then I take it a step further, and I think that some people have an issue with this, but I don't think it's that much of a logic leap at all. But I said, when you're viewing these videos, you are furthering sex trafficking. Why? Because you're going on their website.
Mhm.
They're getting advertising dollars because you went onto their website. That fuels the industry, and guess what? More women get involved. More women are sex trafficked, and even kids. Just the same. That's another thing. It's like, do you know she's of age? You can't tell
Right.
me that you know. So, yeah, all these really distressing and disgusting things, but that's the reality of what it is, and
Right.
you have to have guys know this. It's like, okay, well, If you can write that off, I don't know what to tell you, but I can't help you.
Well, yeah, sin darkens the intellect, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we love to remain in darkness. And of course, we read in sacred scripture that all will be brought to the light, regardless of if we want it to or not. And so it's in our best interest to bring it to the light ourselves with God's grace,
Yeah.
and be a conduit of His grace and allow Him to do His work in us. What are the things that you would say have helped the most for the men that you work with? Like, what are the things that, or is it really different for everybody? I guess that would be my next question. Like, if you were to get started and you said, today I'm going to give you 3 things to do, what would you recommend people do?
So,
The accountability software, I'd imagine.
yeah, it goes back to those 5 steps: accountability and blocking, learning your triggers, sacraments, mortification, prayer. That's all encompassed in that plan. But that's really take any of those 3, but primarily I would say get blocking and accountability software for women as well. Anyone who struggles with this, of course, because you got to start removing the drug, and it's going to be hard. So to answer your question, I apologize.
No, that's good.
The plan is essentially the same for everybody, because our bodies, even though they're different, our biology is all pretty much the same. So you get, trigger, a build up, acting out, release, come down. This is even language we use with drugs. Same, very similar.
And then there's shame too.
Oh, huge.
The cycle of shame.
Yep.
So how do you address the shame? Because because inevitably, if you have an addiction, you're more likely than not going to relapse at some point. And I've seen so many times, you and I discussed this before the broadcast, but these people, they fall into it and they have so much shame that they almost turn in on themselves and they give up hope and they despair that they will ever be freed from this vice. And so what do you do in that situation where someone is like, do I even bother? I'm enslaved.
Well, you have to recognize that that's exactly what the enemy wants you to think. That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Because listen, I was habitual. And like I said, I was never clinically addicted. Most people are not technically clinically addicted, but that doesn't mean that it isn't serious, and that it doesn't mean that there isn't a serious hold on people. Right. So I want to make that totally clear.
Mm-hmm.
But the shame is a huge part of it. A lot of the time, even helping guys recognize that the shame is partially a physiological response to what happens when you have a massive release of dopamine and serotonin after you act out. You have a come down, right? So we're again, like the drug language. I think there was a study that showed that pornography is showing similar effects on the brain mechanism that heroin does.
I think it was cocaine.
Cocaine, that may have been it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember that.
So the dopamine and serotonin. So you're having part of it is chemical. And of course, the enemy is going to jump in. He's going to start accusing you. You're terrible. You're never going to break free. You're going to do all these different things. And then what happens is, if we dwell in that, if we stay in that, then we act out again. It becomes, that desolation, that sadness, that frustration, whatever drives us to seek what makes us feel good, right? Because we're self-inebriated.
We're numbing. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So self-inebriating, and then that cycle continues again. So putting stop gaps in such a way that you can keep yourself, if you can spread things apart and you can recognize, because as you mentioned, people are going to fall multiple times, especially if they're trying to beat this for the first time. It's just a reality of the situation. Unfortunate, but it's part of it, right? And thank God we have examples from the saints who show us that, like, yeah, even the saints had to deal with it.
Yeah.
So the further you can spread those instances out, the more clarity you begin to have, because we're also talking about rebuilding neural pathways in our brain.
Yes. Yeah, that's so true.
It's huge. But if you're feeling despair, if you're feeling sorrow, there is an amount of sorrow that we should feel. Thank God for that. Why? Because you can go to confession and you can sit in front of a priest and you can weep, as I wept and said, I hate that I am doing this. I hate this, and I can't seem to break free. And what is the priest going to do? He's going to absolve you from your sins, and you're going to receive substantial grace in that confessional. Then you're going to go on to the next day. But grace builds upon grace. So if we're not taking this seriously, if we're not putting in blocking and accountability software, if we're not removing temptation, if we're not taking this seriously, then you're just going to end up in the same place you were again. So even if so ideally it goes, you kind of, you fall, you're contrite, you get that grace, and then maybe it stays like this, and you act out again, you fall. Well, as long as you're continuing on the right pathway, as long as you're fighting, it's not like you lose all the grace, because you've
Mm-hmm.
learned things, which is beautiful. You've learned temptations and you've learned triggers, and you have a better idea of what's going on. If you act on that, it's not down here. It's like, well, maybe you're right here, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. It's a little bit more. It's one step in the right direction. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
when people understand that it's not like, oh, like I just lost everything, it's like, yeah, kind of, but not really. Like,
Yeah. It just requires, I think, a little bit more self-awareness, like any sin. And
huge.
that's why I think doing an evening examination of conscience
Oh,
is
yes.
really, really important.
Massive.
Yeah, I really recommend people start doing that. I am not as consistent with it as I should be, but I do notice that when I'm really good about sticking with my evening examination, not only is going to reconciliation a lot easier, I don't need to spend significant amounts of
Yeah.
time like doing my examination. I've already done it, so I have my list.
Right.
But the other thing is that I can see what's going on in my interior life, and it allows me to have more of an awareness of like, okay, this is something I'm struggling with. I'm struggling with impatience and irritability. What is that? Why am I struggling with that?
Right.
And so it allows me to spend time turning inward to consider like what is going on in my heart, and why am I going and reaching for this? Why am I scrolling through my phone endlessly I'm realizing, oh, it's because I'm trying to numb. I'm overwhelmed with my state in life, and prayer requires what feels like too much
Right.
focus, right? And so I'd rather do something mindless. And so yeah, those triggers. Why am I turning to pornography right now? Is it because I'm feeling worthless? We do this for all kinds of stuff. Like
Oh,
why
yes.
am I buying stuff right now that I don't need? It is it because I don't feel good about myself right
Yep.
now and I want to feel better? Often that's what it is. It's rooted in a sense of not feeling worthy of love, feeling overwhelmed or struggling with anger and trauma. Like there are these roots that we really have to dig into, but it requires that we take the time to do that. So an examination, I think, is a great great thing to add to that.
It was so perfectly said. I couldn't have said it better. So we talked about the practical aspects of steps that people can take, but you hit the nail on the head. There's also the spiritual aspects that people need to take. And in my opinion, daily mental prayer, specifically Lectio Divina,
Mm-hmm.
the examination, and rosary. Those three things, I've, this topic aside, I think are foundational to the spiritual life.
Yeah.
And a lot of, there's the old quote about the rosary that says, I don't remember what saint said it, but basically, you're either going to stop praying the rosary or you're going to stop sinning. Even more so with Lectio Divina. If you're taking time in your day to sit and converse with God, which is the entire point of mental prayer, Lectio Divina, or just listen to him speak, even if you're not speaking back. How do you sit face to face with the one who created you with that kind of
Can
stuff
you?
in your heart?
Can
Exactly.
you even sit face to face with him?
Exactly.
Because a lot of people, I mean, I've even heard of people saying watching The Chosen, which, I know your dad likes The Chosen. I know there's a huge debate about that. But for some people, the Jesus that Jonathan Rumi portrays is a little bit too real for them. So they avoid watching things
Hmm.
like The Chosen. And I think, well, that's really interesting. Why does that, if that's Jesus or how you think he is portrayed even, why does that make you uncomfortable? You
Right.
have to sit with that. Like you have to ask yourself, am I ready? Because you could die again at any moment. And are you ready to sit face to face when that happens? Because if you're not, which God have mercy on me, I don't know if I am. I think maybe I would be afraid. Um, then I have to sit with that and like, how do I rectify this? Because this is a relationship, which means I actually have to do something.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Wow. Well, so where can people find more about you and your work? I'm imagining or hoping that if there's anyone watching this, especially men, that they might be able to reach out with you
Yeah.
and kind of be taken under your wing. How can they do that?
Yeah. So primarily, so if you want I should say first, the immediate action plan is on my website, which is dotheharderthing.com. It's in the resources tab. Another phenomenal Catholic resource. They're the best in my opinion. My good friend Jim O'Day started Integrity Restored. They have it down pat because I'm just one dude, but they have an entire institution that helps with these sorts of things. They're amazing. So Integrity Restored is great. Most of my content now, as I said, it's more in the spiritual warfare realm, but I'm always happy to answer questions on this and help give people some guidance. And that's mostly on Do the Harder Thing Instagram. So it's do the underscore harder thing. I was too late to the game to get the, non underscore name.
Oh,
It
that's
is what it
funny.
is. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Well, that sounds awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today to talk
Yeah.
about this. I think we hit so many important issues, and I'm glad about your you just have such a breadth and depth of knowledge on this, and so I'm really hopeful that people will come to you if they have any questions, or really to check out your work. His Instagram is awesome, and if you join his channel, I'm a member in his channel group, and he sends really great quotes and stuff all the time that are really encouraging. So definitely subscribe to his channel too
No, thank
over
you.
there.
That's my favorite part of Instagram, to be honest with you. I'm like, oh, this church father said this. This is amazing. Let me send it
And
out.
that's the part that I'm the worst at. Like, I have a channel and I think I have like 5
Yeah.
subscribers or something because I've literally not posted anything. So, and I have a small following. So, anyway, but that's okay. Thank you again,
Yeah, of
and
course.
God bless you and your family and everybody else that's a part of the Avila Institute. You guys are doing amazing work over there.
Thank you. Thank you.